right, we will call the Planning Commission meeting. Are we ready? Are we recording, Barb? Okay. We'll call the Planning Commission meeting of Wednesday, November 15, 2017 to order. It is 6:35 p.m. And we will begin with a roll call.
Commissioner Azar?
Here.
Brazen?
Here.
Farr? Cassia?
Here.
Kelly?
Here.
Gurink? Martin?
Here.
And Baker.
Here, we received notifications from Commissioners Farr and Gurink that they would not be able to join us tonight. Is there a motion to excuse their absences?
So moved. Support.
There's a motion by Commissioner Brazen with a second by Councilman Martin. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much. That motion passes. We'll move to the approval of our agenda. Are there any additions to the agenda from staff or commissioners? All right, I would look for a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
So moved. Second.
Thanks. That's a motion by Commissioner Kelly. We've got a second by Commissioner Brazen. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Commissioner Williamson has just joined us. Is he in our roll call?
Do you want? Didn't I say Williamson?
I don't
Did
remember.
I skip over him? Williamson?
Here. Sorry for the delay.
I didn't write him down as not responding. So.
I-75 is down to one lane at 696.
Wayward wasn't fun either.
Right during rush hour.
Take your time. We are just moving to our call to audience, item number 3 on our agenda. This is the time for people in the audience to address the Planning Commission on anything that's not on the agenda this evening as we get to items that are on the agenda. If anyone in the audience has questions or comments, you can speak at that time, but is there anyone here who would like to address the Planning Commission on anything not on the agenda? There's a mad rush to the podium. All right, we will move on to item number 4, administrative items. There was an email sent today with a staffing update. It was sent by our city manager, April Lynch. Hi, April.
Hi, good evening. This is probably a conversation I should have had with the Planning Commission a while ago, but it's finally come to fruition, some of the changes that we've been making to CED. Many of you were here in 2010 when we did some mass layoffs and pretty much blew up City Hall, if you will.
I made them.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah.
But you hired me, so you makes up for it, right? And since
that was
then,
bad.
I know, it's all good. But it actually, not to get too caught in the weeds, though, I think for most communities, if you were smart, and I think Ferndale was, is use it as an opportunity to really look at efficiencies and look at really what is it that we need moving forward. And one of the things that, in working with Derek before he left, was it was very quickly apparent that the sooner that we could get him focusing primarily on economic development, the better, the more that was going to bring to the city as it relates to opportunity. And so that was one of the goals that Derek and I had from day one, and we knew it was going to take some time to get there as we kind of started looking at the budget and kind of reworking. And at the same time that taxable value started to rise, so did the economy, if you will, and it's been an explosion of magnitude. As you can tell, you now have 2 meetings a month to navigate all of that. So during that time, just before Derek left, we did hire a full-time planner. If you recall, when Derek was here, he was pretty much the chief cook and bottle washer for CED. So he was managing all of the economic development as well as the planning portion. And so fortunately, we were able to take a look at our permits and all of those kinds of things and realized very, very quickly that we needed full-time planning staff. And so that's when Justin Lyons was hired. In the meantime, Derek left just as we were starting to get him to that. We called it 75-25. We wanted him 75% economic development, 25% strategic and navigating the department. And then we hired Jordan with the same similar goals. And you could even say that even before when Derek left, it still wasn't as busy as it is right now. So we've been reinventing the C department as best as we can to try to navigate what we look at as like the next few years. So I want to talk a little bit about what we've done. I mean, I know primarily you're only focused on planning, but I think it's important for you to know what we're doing with the whole department to kind of help you see how things fit. So in the meantime, we've also had some other folks leave through job opportunities and things of that nature. And throughout the city, anytime anybody leaves, we take a pause and we think about what does the next 5 years look like and what does that mean for us. So we've overhauled the building division. One of the things that is very concerning to our department is that, things cannot be sustainable forever. And so you can't bring on 20 employees to get, it's like hiring for Black Friday and trying to sustain that throughout the rest of the year. So one of the things that we call it a ramp up, ramp down is in our building department. Will really depend on the revenues that come in, will depend on what's being built, permits that are being pulled. So we actually had joined with a partnership with Safe Build about 5 years ago and have continued to grow that partnership. Many communities use them as a tool to offset a lot of their building and their trades, and we continue to use Safe Build. And we've actually, when we lost our building official, we started using Safe Build for building official work as well. That their 100% job focus is on the building side of things. So we have a permanent person in place for us there. It's Scott Worthington. You may or may not see him at a random meeting. And we use Safe Build for a lot of the trades, which we were doing primarily for the last few years. And so that allows us to ramp up and ramp down as needed. It allows us to use the flexibility as permits go down. So can our hours with Safe Build. So it allows that flexibility. Where we really wanted the permanency, though, was in the planning department. As you guys were very familiar with, the master land use plan came about in a way that I think no community has ever seen before in the way that we use that. In fact, I had to convince the person that helped us, and Council Member Martin can recall this, that I kept trying to tell the person who helped us with our strategic plan with City Council, you need to look at our master land use plan, and she kept, I hear you. And I finally said, no, I'm serious. You really need to take a look at that. And she looked at me and she goes, wow, you just saved yourself a lot of money with me because most of my work is done. And so, but with that came about 180 action items. Oh, 118, I'm sorry. I'm including I'm including the rec plan that has another 80 over there. And so we quickly realized that in order to continue to sustain and to really look forward, that we needed to really confirm and address our planning needs. Part of that came in for over the last few years is, not really last few years, for quite some time, Ferndale has really been focused on environmental sustainability. Throughout the master land use plan, that is another rarity that you won't see in a lot of communities. Was the first time that we've ever put sustainability practices in our master land use plan, and that is not very common in most communities. So with that, though, we worked really hard with City Council to really show them that if we are really, really, truly committed to environmental sustainability practices, or sustainability, whatever you want to argue is the word, that we needed some talent behind that. So you've also, I think, have met Erin Quattel. She is one of our newest hires as it relates to a permanent planner here that will, while she'll be helping out in planning areas, her primary focus will be in the environmental areas of all of our planning. So she'll be reviewing plans that not only that are brought forward by those outside of the city, but anything that we do within the city will be looked through that lens as well. So we're really excited to have her on board. The other thing that we've done too has really moved a lot of our stuff online. We're coming full service online, which a lot of our businesses have been super happy about. All of our permits and things of that nature have moved online, which again is freeing up our time to allow our employees to do other things to help address the needs of our community. So with that was some of the changes that we had made prior to November 1st. One of the biggest changes, though, that you've actually seen for quite some time but has been pretty much official now starting November 1st is Justin Lyons is not only our planner but is now our planning manager, who will oversee all the planning division, because we have so much going on in planning and community development. And on the building side, we had to separate some of those duties so that, again, Jordan is going to be seen more on the strategic side of things. So as you've noted, probably for the last 2 years, Justin, he's been your primary conduit for Planning Commission and will continue to do so. He will be basically your person, if you will. He will also be overseeing all of the planning and master land use plan, Ferndale moves, all of the plans that come under planning. He will be your go-to person. You will see Jordan from time to time, but not as much. You might have noticed that he comes in and out as needed. Typically, where you'll see Jordan coming here is very complex issues, or where Justin and Erin might need support. But also, he tends to be our liaison as it relates to any incentives or major real estate issues that need to be addressed in a much broader frame. So you can always rely on any of us if you have any questions or concerns, or you need help with Justin. That's where Jordan and I fall in. But for the most part, you're going to see Jordan really focusing most of his time on economic development in the strategy portion for that division, which is pretty heavy. And you're going to see Justin is, like I said, he's your person, will continue to be your person, and is continuing to develop in his program. We're really excited to be able to promote him to that planning manager and the gifts that he brings and his talents here to the city of Ferndale. So we're really excited about that. We are also, doesn't affect you as much, but it's important to note that we're also going to be elevating one of our employees as well on the community development side of things. We'll be focused on really focusing in a much broader way in our in code enforcement, our blight, our CBDG funds, really starting to dig a little bit even more, to dig a little deeper into some of the blight, which you can see is already getting so much better, but we're just really taking on a much more concentrated focus on that. So in summary, we've had a busy couple years here with the planning division, but I think we're finally, I told Jordan, don't ask me for any more employees, he's not getting any. So this is what you get. But we have a really, really great talent pool, and I'm really excited to be able to kind of close this out and really focus on giving them the development opportunities that they need and to continue to grow this division. And again, I just wanted to say thank you as you're you're probably wondering, wow, I'm from Derek to Justin, now Jordan's here, where does everybody fit? So I wanted to just really give you that overview of what that looks like and the support that we can bring to your team. So with that, I'm done at this point if there's any questions, but I just want to reiterate one more time that I know Justin has got a very good reputation here of being helpful, but if you need something further, Jordan and I are both here to help you as well. Is there any particular questions as it relates to the structure change?
I think it's just really helpful to know, and I really love it when we use the word promote rather than reorganize. So, congratulations, Justin. Because sometimes you never know if, so, yeah. That's wonderful. And because we are sort of casual observers to the structure of city government, I think that was very helpful.
But anytime you have any questions, please let us know. But thank you so much for your support. You guys have been a great commission to work with, and a lot of the things are here because you have helped push them along. So now we're giving you staff to see your vision forward. Thanks so much. I know, right?
Right.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks, April. All right. Well, congratulations again, Justin.
Thank you.
That was excellent and well-deserved, and we're going to have lots of fun with you and Aaron. We will move to the first of our discussion items, and I saw right before I left the office that you had sent out a PowerPoint so that we could follow along, but it looks like the screens are working.
That one is. The other two aren't. So.
I see.
But yeah,
okay. But this one's good.
Yep, this one's good. But if you don't want to turn around, definitely follow along on your laptops and whatnot. So.
Got it. Thank you.
But just wanted to say thanks again. I appreciate it. It's been two and a half years working with this commission, and I've learned a ton, and from all of you, and we've already had a ton of major projects come through this year: parking decks, townhomes, apartments, a little bit of everything. So it's been pretty exciting to see all that progress.
Our first new subdivision.
Yes,
I don't know,
right.
70 years.
So, but I enjoy working with this group. Everybody has a diverse background of experience, and I think I've learned a little bit from everybody. So, looking forward to continuing that knowledge and learning. So, so speaking of that, we've been talking a lot about downtown over the past year, pretty much, and even as part of the master plan too. So, just wanted to revisit that conversation. We had a pretty fruitful conversation in September, June before that, and I don't know if you had a chance to look through the minutes that were included in the packet, but we were all over the place, which was good because it's a tough topic to tackle. So we talked about everything from sustainability and where do drive-through facilities fit, or do they not fit? What is the appropriate building height? What is this map going to look like when we're done? Is an overlay more appropriate than amending the ordinance and so forth? So, so we've been taking all that feedback and just distilling that into a draft that was in your packet. And it's definitely draft, as we talked about last time, especially regarding height. So I think that'll probably take up a lot of our conversation. But this doesn't have to be the last conversation. But certainly I think we're honing in a little bit more. We'll still run this by council and the DDA as well before we have a full-on public hearing. But hopefully we can have some good marching orders to get this moving for the next year's wave of development that could come. So I wanted to introduce, obviously before, Michelle Foster was working for LSL Planning Safe Build Studio on this project. So she, I think we talked about before, she took an opportunity in Spain, which is exciting for her. And so we have been working with Kathleen Duffy at LSL, and she's been really great to work with, and we've been getting her up to speed. And she brings a lot of great knowledge, not only through working through other cities, but she's helped on some Ferndale projects in the past, kind of in the background, and then she works with the MEDC on the Redevelopment Ready Communities program, which we're certified for. Yay.
We better be. We
So
started it.
exactly right. So she brings a lot of that knowledge, and so she also sees it through that RRC lens, and you know, knowing that we're a community, and you know, we have check-ins with that quarterly, and making sure that, you know, future ordinances align with that, and along with the vision of the master plan. So I'm going to let Kathleen do most of the talking, and you know, this can be a discussion just like it was last time. So there's some things we'll cover that we covered last time, but like I said, I think height will probably be a big discussion, and we actually provided a map with some potential areas of where these ordinance amendments, the zoning map amendments could take place. So,
All right.
cool.
Thank you. Kathleen, introduce it. Welcome.
Great, thank you. Thanks for having me. Like Justin said, I've kind of been peripherally involved, if anything, being Michelle's ear in our office and saying, what's going on here, and providing that kind of camaraderie and feedback on projects specific to Ferndale. So bear with me a little bit. Coming into this, you know, with a partially done draft, I might be repeating some things you've already talked about, but having met with Aaron and Justin and discussed the draft as it stood with some of my colleagues, we're kind of coming at it from a fresh perspective, and want to make sure that we're capturing everything that you guys want to see in it. So I'm a relative outsider. I do live in Royal Oaks. I'm very familiar with downtown Ferndale, but knowing what you want, I really need to hear from you a lot today. So like Justin said, we're going to go through this basically each slide. I'm going to be looking for feedback to kind of walk you through this version of the draft. And it's a draft. It's us trying to weed through the minutes from the last meeting, not having been here. That provides a weird kind of perspective on what you all talked about. So if we're way off on something, it's not too late to change it. So like we said, there's been a lot that's gone into this, several meetings, dealing with the developers and meeting with them, looking at your TOD ordinance and kind of the evolution of this project to what it is today. And in reviewing your existing ordinance, I guess, just going back to kind of the fundamentals here. So you've got your CBD district and this new TOD overlay. What does this new code really, what was your purpose in undertaking a new form-based code rewrite for your downtown? If we can just kind of get back to what does the current code not address that you wish it did? Just kind of big picture things, what works, what doesn't, to give me kind of that perspective of why we're doing this in the first place, if you don't mind.
Anyone want to lead that one off?
Justin can definitely chime in.
I was going to say, I can take a stab at it. I think we've been talking about it for 10 years.
Yeah.
Because most of the focus, both from the DDA and the Planning Commission, even in our prior ordinance update, had to do with much more the interaction of the buildings with the physical environment than what was happening in the buildings. So it just seemed a relatively natural fit.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there's anything else other commissioners wanted to add about our interest in a form-based government.
Design just has always been at the top of everyone's list.
Yeah, I mean, to me it's very interesting. When I joined the commission, which it's been a year and a half or maybe almost 2 years.
About 2 years.
I was very surprised at how much time this commission spends on very small details of a development, which the thoroughness is great, but I think that's indicative of us being ripe to have a tool that spells out what our vision is instead of every meeting figuring out what our vision is.
In with regards to things like landscaping and design.
Landscaping, design, what else? What else do you spend too much time on the minutia of?
The,
Curb cuts.
I was going to say curb cuts, drive-throughs, the how buildings address the street.
Where the garbage goes.
Yeah.
Okay.
What were you going to say?
Compatibility. I mean, just getting a good fit.
Yeah, those transition zones are really important. So I like the and I know I wasn't here at the September meeting, but I really like the flex concept.
That's helpful. Because you already have design guidelines that the DDA reviews. Is that correct?
We do. So my understanding, because there are some questions about process here, my understanding has always been by the time something gets to us, the DDA has looked at it, but it seems like it's sometimes reversed.
Yeah, we've kind of cleaned up the process, I would say, and just we have brought to DDA appearance review first now, but the portion of their ordinance that they cover is kind of small, which we can talk about if we want to expand that or not. But it's simply been building materials and colors focused around that, saving some historic storefronts, projects that you don't really see. I think they see more of the request to change a storefront and get rid of a front vestibule that's been on a building for 50 years, and then the DDA says no.
Sorry.
Come up with another plan.
So let's focus on that for a second, if I can probe a little further. Has it been your experience that the DDA actually dives into the historic preservation piece of it? It's not been my experience they responded in that context.
No. So there's kind of two reviews that have happened in the past. So DDA appearance review, which is a smaller group, and they mostly focus on historical character, not deeming specific buildings historic, but mostly trying to keep the ground level of buildings, keeping those historic facades. It's more facade focused than anything else. And then the DDA Design Committee is a separate group, and they have a few architects, like Michael here, that kind of probe more onto overall building design and things like that.
So what is your opinion about expanding the scope? I can think of several pros and cons, particularly when you look at how much time this body spends on certain things that could be delegated theoretically down to the DDA.
I think it could be delegated to an ordinance.
Yeah.
I don't think
Yeah,
it even needs to go to
I
another
think,
body.
and I think that's what.
Do we need the other
That's
one?
what I'm trying to get at.
Yep.
I don't know that that's a decision for us to make, but yeah.
Yeah, we're kind of suggesting that this ordinance would give staff more power to
Hold all in.
to kind of save some time. I mean, I think it's important to get other feedback, but I think that if this is prescribed more in the ordinance, then there's less of a question and interpretation when it goes to design committee, appearance review, and then planning commission.
Okay.
I think it's also timely to talk about form-based codes just because of how much interest there is in new construction in the DDA. And I sense a feeling of sort of encroachment into the neighborhoods, not just in the DDA. We've had it recently in other neighborhoods too.
Absolutely.
But whether it's parking or noise or activity or physical structures, sort of how we want these interactions to happen, I think is very important for this commission to think about. And you addressed, there were some questions about setbacks and frontages.
We'll get into some of that sensitivity in a bit here. In reading the appearance review ordinance, it has language that is very, very typically in a zoning ordinance. And so I was just kind of like, okay, do we copy this? Do we write it to match it? And from the RRC standpoint, making sure that when someone comes to submit a plan, they have some more predictability. Obviously, you're a certified community, so you passed, checked all those things off. But from their perspective, coming in, do they know that they have to go through 3 different committees before it gets approved. Like, that's a lot from just as a pure outsider. It works, clearly it works, but could it be faster? Could it be cleaned up? Could you guys spend less time on minutia if the details are already in the zoning? And maybe it is just repeating some of those same components from the appearance review standards into the, just making sure they match, being a little bit more specific on some of the things that are important to you, so that by the time it does come here, it is just a quick, yeah, this looks good, or administratively, they meet all the requirements in the ordinance.
I wouldn't be surprised if we eventually extrapolated some of those appearance review standards citywide, frankly.
Yes.
I mean, I look at some of our other corridors, and they are in need of attention, and obviously this ordinance is the place to do that rather
Yeah.
than creating other regulatory bodies.
Exactly. Okay. That's helpful.
Any other thoughts from the table about why a form-based code?
I think we've mostly summed it up, just that it gives this body more teeth in getting the kind of development that complies with our master land use plan and fits within the context of the city. So,
Okay. Yeah, I think in talking with Justin and Aaron a few weeks ago, just trying to wrap my head around all the discussions to date and the existing ordinances and looking at things, I'm like, in reviewing the TOD ordinance, it seems like that is kind of enough to kind of get what you need along the corridor for right now. I think that you could expand, and we can code for all of that right now. But when it comes to like the basics of what good urbanism through form-based code usually regulates is height. So you already have minimum 2-story height. You have 0-foot lot lines. You have uses that are mixed. You have some basic material kind of architectural requirements. And to me, those are the basics. And I don't know how much more. So we kind of for this draft focused on the CBD, and I'm going to flip to the map here in a second. But be thinking, like, what does TOD do the trick right now? Does that is already required? It may be in the future simplifying it so that getting rid of the base zoning might be one way to make it simpler, and just have it be its own district. So that's kind of just prepping you for this next slide. So in looking at your district, with both Justin and Aaron, and then my colleague Michaela is also an expert on this. She's actually in North Carolina now, but she and I were having lots of Skype sessions, zooming in on Google Earth, with my local expertise having been here, and hers as having done this from places all over the country. I mostly have Michigan examples in my pocket. So we kind of came up with 2 sub-districts, which are based on frontages. So when it comes to form-based codes, it's more, like you said, about how the public realm, how the buildings interface with the public realm, and a great way to code that way is not to do it on a parcel-by-parcel basis, but how things front the street. So the idea is that the color, the dark blue there, is the kind of your core, I call it urban general on here. I think we switched the name to downtown core in the draft. Should have switched the map, but it was evolving. Whatever we want to call it, but basically your main street, most intense development, 0 lot lines, good fenestration on the first floor, probably the area where you're going to want the most height, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then the idea of this urban flex district, which is kind of a step down. So maybe here you're allowed, we basically framed it to have 2 different frontages so that you could have townhouse type frontages, so that there would be a little bit of a setback, a little bit more flexibility in that front yard build too, so that if someone wanted to build a townhouse type building, whether or not those are individual residences or they're live-work units, but that character, when I say townhouse, that's what I mean, is that character of more of a residentially scaled building. You could do it in those areas, and that provides more of a step down, especially as some of those areas front, especially along Withington on the west side there, how they front residential neighborhoods. So it would provide a lower scale for those areas. From a purely administrative point of how this gets adopted into your ordinance, it makes the most sense from my perspective to just amend your CBD district so that you're not rezoning a lot. You might want to add the little pockets that I've added on there. They seem like logical extensions of where this character that we're describing could apply. So over on the west there are those it's currently zoned multiple family would be able to meet the same kind of requirements that we're talking about with this sub-district. And then that little mixed-use one light purple area over on the east side next to Bermuda there. So those are just some pockets that you might add to CBD, but in terms of going through the process of adoption and having it be the least contentious, I don't think that rezoning your downtown area would, I think most people would be generally in support of what we're trying to accomplish, but just from practice of minimizing how many people you have to notice, that sort of thing, just replacing the CBD district seemed to make a lot of sense. I think you probably already have buy-in that's your downtown anyway. So that's kind of this first round of the map, and we can absolutely fine-tune this. This is just our first take at it, and kind of I want to just sort of explain what we were thinking of with those two different frontage types. And then those arrows pointing in a couple different directions. So how far north do we want to go? How far south? Would there be this third district that is your north and south Woodward areas where maybe you would want to allow some flexibility for drive-throughs, or maybe there's a different parking condition, or much lower height, a different mixture of uses. They definitely feel like different areas. Maybe they're not even the same. Whether we tackle that in this amendment is one thing, but that to me was my interpretation of all of the minutes from September of thinking of those areas. And then also Justin said, what about going east to the railroad tracks? So I put a little inset map there. C2 is it? I think extends all the way to the railroad, and I think you could very logically extend that urban flex kind of district that way to kind of capture it. So those would be rezonings, but it might be an easier piece to chew off by doing that. So that's kind of the approach to the map. I know you haven't really seen many maps yet. Do we want to talk specifics on the map, or do you want me to go into a little bit more detail on the two different sub-districts, which is what's next? Does anyone have any big comments on the map?
I really like the concept of focusing on the frontages. I think that makes
Okay.
a ton of sense. So I don't have any questions beyond that right now.
I'd comment that extending east to the railroad tracks in light of what we've seen proposed as development over in that region in the last couple of years, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
We've got a large space. That large space is just east of Como's. That's either going to happen with the proposed 4-story development, or it's going to end up being something like that that's going to go on that parcel. Wolf River is either going to happen, or else they're going to knock those buildings down on their block, and it's going to end up being, I think, probably something like that. So either way, I think the urban flex concept going to the tracks would fit with what's already existing, what we've seen proposed.
And give you some of the same kind of teeth that we're going to be talking about for the core.
Sorry for stepping out, but a little cheer that my mom just got out of the hospital after 3 days.
Yay!
Right.
Yay. So I apologize for stepping out, but when you see Mom's cell come up, you kind of run for it. Are we talking about districts?
Yeah. So the idea of this like downtown core district, like I said, this is kind of your most straightforward existing building form that's already there, reinforcing that, having storefront frontages, requiring active first floor uses. We'll be talking about use in a second here, but be thinking, are there any uses that you would want to prohibit along these areas that might be different from other parts of the CBD? So right now there's not that differentiation that we're proposing between the core and the flex. So where I found that flex kind of district, we're doing it in Lansing as well, as to be the most useful is when it comes down to really pinpricking the uses. So I think the misconception of form-based codes is we only care about how buildings look. We don't care about what happens on the inside, and that's not the case. It's definitely more of an emphasis on form than what we're used to, but it allows us to still be particular where we want to be.
Have we talked about first floor parking?
No, that was on my list.
Yeah, so the one on my list that I didn't see in the draft were some specific both facade length requirements and which we've waived a lot recently, and now that I'm kind of looking around, I'm like, I don't know if I want to keep waiving that. at least not
So have a,
without-
so have a maximum facade length?
We already do.
You do?
And
Okay.
we waive it.
You waive it? Okay.
We've waived it 4 or 5 times
Several
in the last
times.
couple years.
Yeah.
For developments mostly in the downtown. But those developments, because we know we have parking challenges in the downtown, have also included shielded but still first floor parking, which I think is another thing that there's some general consensus that we want to limit in the future, that we've maybe extended a bit beyond where we would want to. So those were 2 things that I was looking for in the ordinance,
Yeah,
based
that's,
on what we've already got, that I think we want to at least have a conversation
Yeah,
about keeping.
definitely.
Yeah.
so I guess the distinguishing thing, so maybe between the core and the flex, because right now there are parking lots in the more of the flex district. I mean, would we want to allow parking as a principal use is one way to do it. Obviously, the shielding, we have a parking setback where you're not allowed, I think in both districts right now, we have a parking setback, so that means that you can't build any first floor parking within the first 30 feet.
We've been allowing it underneath in 2 actually pretty notable developments that would either fall in the core or the flex, even
Right.
without the extension of the flex. Oh, no, it wouldn't
They brought
without the
flags
extension
in.
of the flex.
I think my caution or question of how it would be impacted is we have a
Here. Yeah, you're right. It's right there, isn't it?
significant amount of interest in city-owned parking lots today. So as those flip over, what's the impact of that? Some of which just want air rights to build above. So how would that
I'm
impact?
sorry, I missed that, Jim.
I said when it comes to first floor parking though,
Yeah.
we have a significant amount of interest in city-owned lots today.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, and some of it's just air rights above the plots. So how deep and how far in those scenarios do we want to address
That was-
first floor parking?
That was actually my first question about all of this, was how we would accommodate parking needs for denser downtown development, and how much public or shared access parking we can, whether we compel developers to build it through some sort of tool, particularly if it's on public property, obviously, or
Yeah.
using major incentives. For example, if the Como's site goes up to 70
Yeah.
feet,
At the council level,
how do we address that? Because our public coffers are now extended. So what's the remedy to both allow growth and control some of that
Yeah.
encroachment?
And I think also that, you asked the question about parking as a principal use. And we have a zoning classification for parking that we've been talking about. What are we going to do with this? Should we get rid of this? So, I mean, I feel like this kind of spills over into that
little bit.
conversation.
and I can't speak, we just started the discussions and the work sessions about the tolerance of council and sale or purchase or use of city-owned parking lots. I can't commit one way or another where
Oh, no, we
the
don't
body's
ask
at,
you to.
yeah.
No, I think that's not even the discussion tonight, Dan. It's
No,
more
it's not, I'm just
if you're.
context.
So let's say you've got, a surface lot that accommodates 100 cars now, and you're building something that, the impact of the use is going to be significantly more than that.
Yeah.
What is particularly for a city-owned property, what's the responsibility of the developer to accommodate that?
And it kind of gets into a parking management situation too. So it's hard because we are really in a lot
Without
of these.
overbuilding parking.
Yes.
also add,
So
'cause it
from
sure
a
is
zoning
expensive in the
perspective,
long term.
there's only we can talk about the number of spaces we're requiring. Right now, let's focus on physically where we want it to go. So
Okay.
if there is a need for a ramp, as it's written right now, you have to basically line that ramp. So you'd have to have active first floor uses, and you can have apartments and stuff above it. But for that first 30 feet, we want it to look like a building on the outside, and it would have to be like donut shaped in your core, in your downtown core. And it's written right that way now for the flex. And I'm wondering if you might want to allow more flexibility for parking lots and parking structures not being lined in the flex kind of district. Because there already are existing parking lots in it now.
That's an
I
easy
just got
one.
reactions, no.
Yeah.
No.
That's fine, we'll leave it.
Yeah. Andy,
At
do
the
you
same
have-
time, with a 30-foot setback for parking, looking realistically at what these parcels look like
Right.
along this area, I guess I struggle to see how, unless we're requiring everybody who wants to build more than a couple stories to dig down and do underground parking like the dot, I struggle to see how a reasonably sized project can really happen with even a 30-foot setback for parking, because that's cutting off a big chunk of where they can put cars on a lot of these parcels.
The
I mean,
setback as it would abut residential, you mean? In the
well, no,
urban
just the
flex?
No, we have a separate parking setback.
the proposed
listed.
parking setback, 30 feet.
Yeah.
You know, I don't like the idea of the cars. You know, I'd love it if we could just say, let's have a 30-foot parking setback, and we never have to worry about having cars, you know, within 30 feet of the front of the property. But just looking at the parcels, I'm not sure how realistic it is.
What about only requiring the 30-foot setback on the first floor? So that you could have an entrance into the parking ramp, but it would immediately go up and parking would start on the second floor. That would be an alternative.
Now I understand what parking setback means.
I think that might be more realistic, because at that point we could provide second floor parking and still provide the ground floor retail. So to me, that solves two problems.
Other thoughts on that?
Thinking about like the Wolf River proposal, that project would, you know, that wouldn't happen with a 30-foot setback.
Right.
They're going to be probably 15, 20 feet. Cars will be parked 15, 20 feet from the front of the property. For, I think what, I think for something that is more commercially focused, that makes sense, having it only apply to the first floor but not the second. You know, if you're talking about something that's going to have a lot of parking integrated into the structure, I think that works. But for a residential development that is going to be probably struggling to comply with the parking requirements as it is, even without a 30-foot setback, having that 30-foot setback apply, I think it's harder to do that development if you are having. We're already looking for people to be doing mixed use. We're already looking for people to be doing commercial on the first floor. But then if you can't even have apartments on the second floor, but you got parking on the second floor, and then you got to go up to a third story to have your residential units, I think that could be problematic. And I don't know the solution, frankly. I'm just looking at it.
So there's the building in downtown Royal Oak, the northwest corner of Main and 11 Mile. Is everyone familiar with that? It's a condo, kind of 4 or 5 story apartment building.
Oh,
and
Bob Wolfson's building?
I don't know who built it. It was built before I moved here. But there's parking on the first floor, and you
Across
can
from
see it.
Diablo's?
It's like right across from the main
It's
arch.
Bob's building, yeah, okay.
It's got parking on the first floor. It's reasonably shielded. It's not great, but that's what I'd be fearful of. I don't think that's perfect, especially for that corner. It's a prime
Seems similar
corner.
to what we've done.
Yeah.
So like
we
you
don't
can
love it.
see the cars still, and there's apartments all above it, but it's just that first floor. So it's not ideal. I would say, so like that's what I don't know that you want in your along 9 Mile. Maybe that condition is more acceptable in this urban flex district is kind of where I was leaning.
It seems to be that it's starting to dead end our downtown as we've started to allow this sort of development, because now we have 2 blocks on either end of 9 Mile where you get to the corner, and there's almost no sense in continuing down that side of the block because there's nothing for an entire city block. No retail whatsoever, no storefronts, no pedestrian activity. So I think we're trying to prevent that. I don't know if I'm speaking out of turn, but that seems to me what we're trying to do.
I think that's a really good way of looking at it. These like kind of dead zones.
Exactly. We have kind of the opportunity to extend our downtown, especially as you're saying, to the railroad, as we move east. And I would hate to do another development on the other side of 9 Mile that's doing the same thing, and now we've truncated our downtown at that point.
Yeah, I guess if the Wolf River development actually happens too, I mean, they've started building Ferndale House, that's apparently going to happen. If Wolf River does happen as well, then we've got those 2 large residential developments. And then I guess that raises the question, do we really need to worry about whether someone can build another residential development in the area? You know, we're getting pretty built out on residential units in that
Doesn't
in
mean
that downtown
speculators
area
don't try.
anyway. But maybe that's a good avenue to, cut that off before too many people want to jump into what they're viewing as a booming residential market in Ferndale. Starting too much of a build out, economic conditions change, and then the next thing you know, we've got half-built buildings or buildings that no one wants to manage or maintain.
Because what's in the pipeline has, if not fulfilled, come very close to fulfilling
Our
what our
best
market
guess.
study identified.
Oh, it's more than
as needed.
fulfilled.
Oh, it's exceeded
Yeah.
it.
Another thing in terms of you're talking about useful life of things in the future, I don't think we added in here, but I think it would be good to add is that when they're building parking decks, that it has a minimum floor height so that it can be adapted into non-parking in the future. So that's something we've been adding lately as we're uncertain for what parking demands are going to be, especially with transit and autonomous vehicles. We don't really know. And so that's a way to say, if we end up not needing all of this to be parking, it can be retrofitted into
Oof, that sounds
building.
expensive.
Can I ask maybe a silly question? I mean, this kind of goes off of what Ian was saying, but do we just cut off parking decks at this point? Do we foresee that that's going to be a need?
After the
I guess it
current project?
depends on how
Correct.
far out you want to look, right? So if you're taking a 30 or 40-year view in terms of what these major investments are for the city, right? So you just bonded for 30 years, right?
Mhm.
So perhaps not.
I don't think it's a silly question. I think it's very relevant. I'm not sure what the answer is. I would not be favorable towards another parking deck.
Right, me neither.
But if there was a need for one, we do have the Withington lot, which is a big lot that could be, I mean, even if that was 2 stories, that's adding a lot of spaces. We've got the parking lot right outside here between here and the library, which could be, I don't really like the idea, frankly, of a parking structure there, but if there had to be one, there's already a big surface lot there. I guess I don't even look in thinking 15, 20 years out, if we have continued development at a fairly rapid clip, are we really going to need more than potentially 2 other parking structures?
Well, and I mean, if we are promoting all of these other modes of transportation and we're making investments elsewhere in bike lanes and, transit possibly and whatever else, I mean.
And we don't want to become a downtown entertainment district.
Right. We don't want people to just drive in and drive out. We want them to live here and be here. And I say that and I know it's hard to say, no more. But it's kind of where I'm at.
But this is a conversation about long-term land use planning, so I think it's a perfectly appropriate question.
So I'm hearing don't allow parking as a principal use.
Well, even in what we're doing today, no, everything would have to be mixed use.
Yep. And so if it's incorporated into a building, first floor, don't have it be within pedestrian distance. Have there be an active use on the first floor. It can
Yeah.
be above that. It can be underneath that. As long as I think how we have it written is pretty close to what you're saying. So
Yeah, I think that could have a really interesting impact on the desirability of more residential projects,
Which wouldn't be the worst thing, given that we're.
given the big ones that are going up.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we've seen so many people that have come before us just looking for feedback with proposed residential developments that haven't even gotten to site plan review. Thinking further down 9 Mile towards the west, there was the one we had just a few months back. There's been plenty.
And in other neighborhoods.
Yeah, it's getting, and speaking of those developments too, the one up on 10 Mile is actually for sale now. That
The church?
the church is now for sale.
Really?
As a fully approved project, it's on the market now that they have their approval. So I'm not sure, maybe the desirability of building these new residential developments in the city is already starting to take a little bit of a turn.
Well, that was a project we could kind of tell was going to be challenging. So
Yeah, true.
Sorry, we've gone off on a little bit
Some
of
of
tangent.
those,
I'll bring
okay,
us
quick
back.
question. Some
I'll
of
bring
those
us
site
back.
things that have not even made it to site plan, what was it about them that was abhorrent?
Right.
Okay.
Well, and I
But still, I'm
And I
just
would
curious.
argue the maturity of the developers in some of those projects, clearly some of them were in over their head. You
In
know.
terms of financing and
Sure.
other, yeah. So we've actually had one thing in particular that has got site plan approval. I think it got site plan approval or got very close, and then came back with a totally different concept because their financing structure changed.
Okay.
I think down
Now he's back to his
Livernois
original
and 8.
concept.
Regardless of where he is now, you know, when you're self-financed,
Mhm.
you're in a different conversation spot.
Okay, that was helpful.
Yeah.
We
The
had,
city can build a mixed-use parking structure because the city wants a mixed-use parking structure, and the city's going to bond for a mixed-use parking structure,
Yep.
right? I think we saw, you know,
Mm-hmm.
one of the really key things that didn't even, frankly, get to us, let alone close to a site plan, was a huge mixed-use development proposal for the Withington lot.
Yeah.
So it was a very ambitious project that required a number of different layers of financing and a lot of things that all kind of happen at the
Sure.
same time. And I wanted to make sure to talk about those mega block style developments as well. You know,
Yes,
to what
so-
and I see how you've designated Withington, sorry,
we have,
as urban flex, and I think that's a really interesting response to that earlier 360 project.
and we have some articulation, a start on articulation in here, not changed much from what Michelle did, but I'm wondering, and I remember her asking me about this, and I don't think it made it into the draft of having a like a maximum frontage length that to require you to make things look like storefronts, and that every 60 feet you'd have an entrance and have that rhythm of,
In downtown core.
yeah, it could be in the flex too if you want it, but for sure in the core. To require entrances, to have vertical
was in here.
delineations. I don't think, maybe it,
I thought, yeah, you've got primary street access.
we have access, but we don't have, we do have, yeah, okay, so we have one functional entrance, but we don't have a like maximum, like we have bays of articulation language that I have from another area that I think might be getting at what you're talking about for not having mega blocks.
Or if we do, actually, my question was more, if we did want to take another crack at redeveloping, if we, the city, you know, did want to take another crack at redeveloping a huge city-owned parcel, something like that, Withington parking lot, this urban flex along Withington is an interesting response to that whole conversation about setbacks and walls and cars, lights, and how it would interact with that neighborhood. But that parcel in particular, I was just sort of curious. Are we by making it urban flex, are we ensuring that it's going to interact correctly with the neighborhood, or are we restricting what can be built there?
Yes,
Yes,
to both.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it was a little bit of a
It's such
poorly phrased question.
No,
I mean, it's just such an odd area,
Yeah.
you know, because it could really go either way.
Well, that sort of leads me to something that I've been thinking about as I'm looking at the sub-district map, and that's the gradient between the urban general and then the urban flex and then everything else.
Yeah.
It seems to be almost a little too abrupt of a switch between the two, and I don't know how to resolve that necessarily, but
I was
we're-
thinking it, sorry, I'll let you finish.
I wonder, I mean, I hate to say, oh, we need another proposed sub-district that's the next layer between that and, let's say, R2 residential, because I think on Saratoga, for example, we have urban general just abruptly stopping, and then you're in an R2 district. And is that appropriate? Should there be some more flex in that location? I know those are houses today, but does there need to be, do we need to think ahead because there could be a 70-story building right next to a 2-story home at some point in the future based on this?
So we can limit the height. We can make the 9 Woodward kind of node an extra height area. When we talk about height, that's what I was thinking. That whole that's where you want your most intense stuff is at 9 and Woodward. So we can on some other ones other codes I'm working on right now, we draw in a line for where storefronts are required, and then that's another way of just adding a level of that first floor activation, but then everything else would be the same. So definitely, it can be refined even more. I think you could allow mixed-use buildings in the urban flex if they front a certain street, if they, whether that's classified on a street map or here, we can specifically call out the street names. There's all sorts of ways that we can approach this. So
I think if we can do that, I would be more comfortable with that because you're right that there are those abrupt
There's just certain pieces of the map where it's almost you see a problem situation in the future just kind of building in your head.
Right.
And for example, let's see,
Different streets are treated differently in the existing ordinance, right?
yeah, and I think the other thing to note, let me see, where is this in the presentation? Is this idea of adjacent to residential.
Yeah.
So when adjacent to residential, there's X, Y, and Z. So we'll talk about the setback in a minute. But that's absolutely something that in the language itself can become a bunch of little asterisks without necessarily mapping it all.
Sure.
So your biggest concerns would be intensity of use, height, placement, with those transition areas even into.
Yes.
Okay.
No drive-throughs ever again.
So right now we're not talking about drive-throughs at all.
I'm just saying. No.
Yeah. We'll get through a couple of these things, and then we'll talk. If we want to extend it up and down Woodward, we can. And I feel like that's where the conversation is, not so much in this area.
We've just covered sort of height and parking, which are two huge topics. I'm sure we'll return to them in a moment.
Yeah.
I'll admit I just texted Justin and I was like, who's in our audience? So Ferndale House, do you guys have, welcome, do you guys have particular questions? I want to make sure that if you had questions or wanted to put anything on the table about height or parking, or I just want you to feel free. Please, yeah, come on up. I was like, Justin, do you know who's here and which one are they here for? So I realized we probably just touched a couple things that you guys might have questions or want to be part of the discussion about.
Well, yes, Ed Siegel, part of the Ferndale House team.
Hi, welcome.
Mark Childers is in the audience as well as the
There we go.
architect from Design House. I guess a couple quick things, taking into account what you guys are saying with regard to the walkability and potential for an abrupt stop at the corner there of Planovan. I think we would prefer, certainly, to have as much retail and first floor mixed-use space as we possibly can. The challenge is financial. To go down or build up an extra story of parking is an extraordinary challenge to make the numbers work. And so I guess that's just one thing that I want to, of course, having you guys make your own decisions, but that it becomes so cumbersome that it's almost impossible without some sort of assistance or in some capacity. That's just the one comment. And in terms of height,
that would be in general in a residentially focused development like you guys are working on now.
Correct.
Okay.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yep.
And then, sort of to that retail end, the first floor use end, I think one of the challenges for a prospective retail user is where their customers come from. right? And so if we're imposing, or I should say, making sure that all the first floor is retail, there might be some challenges to the existing businesses that are in place. So that's just one thing that, as we try to be a good neighbor here to the folks that have been before us, I want to make sure that we're focused on that. So, I think the excavation costs are pretty high, and the disposal costs of the material, while that's not obviously your primary concern, it is something to account for. And then I guess just a quick word on I don't know that this is a mega development per se, but it's a larger development, certainly.
Big for Ferndale.
Sure, yeah. But, I think one of the things it does do is provide some density and provide some 24/7 potential population for the existing businesses. Hopefully that's helpful to the folks that are already here. And so while I understand there may be some desire not to have that, I do think it's also has its benefits as well. So,
Thank you. Yeah, I think we agree and are excited, knew that we had capacity to add rental and other types of for sale options in and around the downtown. And the response, obviously, from the development community was huge. So I think the question we're sort of asking ourselves now is, are we at a risk of overbuilding to the detriment of what's already there? Should the next thing and the next thing come? You guys are in your building. So when I think about like a mega block, I think about at Wayne State where we closed blocks and we had so like Ferndale Foods that has two frontages, or Withington that essentially has two frontages because you've got an alley and you've got those were the things I was thinking about when I used that phrase. Is how would that interact on two different frontages, potentially with two different sets of regulations? Thanks. Yeah, please feel free to ask questions.
And then I think, you guys already touched on it, but I think the thing we keep running into, which, is just, I think, a symptom of Metro Detroit, is how much parking...
Cars.
Yes, how much parking do we require, and obviously, not waiving parking for, an entire ground floor for retail or something, that's a little tougher to politically, I think, sell. But it just comes to a point of we keep building for cars. We're just inducing the demand. But so that's a tough nut to crack, certainly. But continually, when we meet with developers, a lot of them, their biggest concern is the parking costs more to build than other parts of the building, and so it's a tough balance. You guys have obviously dealt with that the past few years. So I don't know what the answer is to that, but we've definitely had developers say, we would certainly put mixed use on the ground floor if we didn't have to park at all, which we have waived some of that, but it's tough to continue to do that, and it's been pretty small. Yeah.
Well, and I think, though, that with the DOT coming, we're at a point where we have the opportunity to say, well, we are creating this parking structure. And so now, because we are doing that and we're addressing parking in some way throughout the city, then we will be focusing on these other modes, too. I think the timing makes a lot of sense to be looking at this.
Yeah.
So.
Commissioner Cassio, did you have
I just wanted to say that just due to us being over capacity for housing based on our market study, it seems like we're at a point where we have the ability to be a little more choosy about the developments that do happen in Ferndale. So even if we do stymie some of this development, maybe we're now getting more of the development that is ideal for our master plan, which is to say ground floor retail with mixed uses, residential above, second floor parking or underground parking. If we get fewer of those projects, but it's more of the project that we want, I think that we've done what we set out to do with this form-based code.
couple things. So the way we've defined active street level uses is it's not just retail. So it's retail, restaurants, bars, whatever, the typical, but also active uses for residential or lodging. So if you had a hotel, if you had an apartment building, it could be a lobby, a club room, that sort of thing. So it's not, you know, and the question is, do you want to allow office? That's another layer of all of this, and that could come in the sub-district kind of differentiation too, that maybe along those light blue urban flex frontages, an office is an acceptable first floor use.
I love the way it's integrated into the back of buildings already along 9 Mile, and how it fronts alleys. So, like it fronts the Withington parking lot rather than 9 Mile. But that's,
Yeah, and
that's
so-
a very specific use, you know, that fits that building.
So because there's precedent for that, maybe that's an added level of like stepping down in terms of intensity.
I also want to make sure that we follow our own requirements. It's something I've been thinking about a lot, actually related to our parking structure, which is, and when Kathleen said lobbies, thinking about the lobby space that may or may not ever be connected to office up above, right? So if we were to have another project that had a speculative piece where, you know, we built it so we can put something up there, to make sure we're not leaving dead space somewhere for that eventual potential second piece, because we've, at least my impression of the designs that we were looking at, we've left a bit of a dead space in the middle of our mixed use parking lot, and I flipped out a little bit when suddenly it was brought to my attention that no one would even be able to exit and enter through it and use the stairs and actually use it as a reception lobby, which certainly can be modified, and but we need to make sure to also follow our street front activation requirements in our own buildings.
You just mentioned alleys. We classified them as not being required to meet the same frontage standards as everything else, but I think we are missing a piece and need to add in what level of expected alley activation there is. So you'll see on this map, I added
I like
a line that says, you know, add specifics for second front door here, and what you're describing next to the Withington lot. I think we need to clarify a little bit that we do expect that to not just be a back door that's ugly, and while it might not be a frontage that requires the same exact level of articulation and fenestration and everything as other places, I think we can spice that up a bit.
That's interesting. My impression is that typically in Ferndale, the one or two that we've vacated and done something with have been city financed. I think about the one behind Dino's. Can you put an alley on a zoning map? I'd love to see some requirement about how you have to treat that alley on Withington should anything ever happen there.
Yes, absolutely.
But it's also a city-owned property, so we'd be probably doing a PD
But you
on it
can-
anyway.
Yeah, but you can code for that in a form-based code for sure.
Interesting.
We could have a whole section on alleys if you want. And
Definitely spent some time on that during the master plan, so I mean, I think it's appropriate.
we'll add that.
Would that include, well, I guess a couple of those neighborhoods that we looked at during the master plan are slightly outside of these districts, just north, just east.
But if this is sort of an entree toward looking at those other districts,
Yeah.
I think it would be good for us to start here.
Yeah, think of this as like a pilot in the framework, so be anticipating how this module can be like expanded for sure. Let's talk a little bit. How do I pull this back out? Here we go. So you already have the design. I'll get the terminology wrong here. The appearance review and the design committee, they're two separate things. Okay, I thought they were one thing. So already I'm confused. So there are those two things. Then there's this section that's in your ordinance right now that actually is pretty strong from my perspective in terms of, here's the 100 foot. I knew it was in there somewhere. 100 foot in length shall be articulated, blah, blah, blah. So again, this is already in your ordinance. You already have these two other pieces. I think we talked about maybe incorporating some of what's in those other pieces into the form-based code. Are you fine still referencing this section, or, because this applies to places beyond the CBD. I think it's under a heading called like commercial and mixed-use buildings or something like that. So I guess, it's this, if you're planning on gradually, reworking other districts in the ordinance, maybe it makes sense to leave it in this section.
Mm-hmm.
We could do an amendment to this section. We could just reference this section in the form-based section. We can copy it verbatim. We can tweak things, add more. I mean, this is always, I always say with communities where I'm approaching this for the first time is how far do you want to go, like, on that spectrum of regulating architecture. You have to be a little careful because there's only so far that we can push people. But I mean, if you had like a thermometer, like, is this doing the trick? Are there things that you wish, when it comes to actual architectural design, that you wish were in the code itself? Some of those things that you might spend too much time nitpicking as a commission that could just be spelled out more clearly. We can discuss it a little bit now, but that's kind of,
I think it's less about, us having an opinion about some things that we're looking for outside of just wanting there to be something visually interesting and not just blankness or, blah, I guess. But I haven't seen any one particular design style that we're all wanting to see more of. So I think it's good to have some basic guidelines, but I don't know how far I would be comfortable with pushing that as an agenda too much.
I don't think it has to be something where we're pushing an architectural style, but if there are kind of compositional requirements that we have, I think, written into this, where it's about articulation and
Right.
and balconies and breaking things up and materiality, I think that's what we're trying to achieve is diversity in facades.
do you feel like it does it already with these standards, or is there a piece missing?
I think that these standards result in the right sorts of things, right? So I think about the new project next to the fire station at Livernois and 9 Mile, and
Right.
that would just be like a flat vinyl siding wall. if we hadn't had something like this in terms of materials and design standards for that northern wall, that would have been like the ugliest approach from 9 Mile ever.
Because it supports the character right
Yeah.
now, which is what
Right.
we were trying to go for, is that there's a Ferndale, a character of Ferndale, and that should be maintained.
Yeah.
And,
Or even push forward a little bit,
right,
so
yeah, that just not decline.
it doesn't, we don't require that they be historic looking cornices and colonnades,
Right.
Yeah.
and we've seen it interpreted pretty creatively, I think, recently.
I wouldn't be opposed to looking at this under a magnifying glass a little bit closer and determining if it really is doing what we want it to do, or if things needed to be added to it, or taken out. I mean, one way or another. I think it could be something that's revisited.
Okay.
Does the DDA have a preference one way or another in terms of design review? Is it with them? Is it in an ordinance? Do things get combined and enhanced?
I mean, so the appearance review committee essentially is the DDA director.
Staff? Right?
Yeah, CED director, and then someone appointed by April, which is a business owner in town. So it's almost, staff oversight, really, right now. DDA design committees where there's more variety of opinions.
But the design guidelines that the design review committee uses as guidance,
Yeah. Yep.
These aren't them.
No, it's a separate section, but it's very similar to this. It talks about, for percentage of windows and not allowing a certain percentage of EFS and stuff like that.
Which is typically what I put in a form-based code anyway.
Yeah, I mean, is there any way that we can just streamline all of this? I mean, I know you've been talking about that, but if that particular set of standards is different than these, can we make them all the same?
I mean,
Right.
I think so. Yeah, I would speak with, I would check with Barry his thoughts on, an evolution of the peer review committee's ordinance, but I mean, some of it is specific to downtown, but I can see a lot of those things apply to Livernois, apply to Hilton in the future. So I think there is a way to streamline it, so we can technically more growth.
What I wouldn't want to see is for us to work to integrate, some of the design standards into the ordinance to make it streamlined, and then have the DDA come back with a whole new set of something,
Right.
just to sort of keep that process. Because if we're
Yeah.
really going to streamline it,
Yeah.
and I'm not sure how we make that happen with a separate quasi-governmental body.
Well, I mean, is there a way to have a collaborative conversation about this, and
But I don't think we can tell the DDA that they can't
No.
make more guidelines.
no, and I'm
So
not.
if in a couple of years they wanted to.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that. I feel like we need to work together on it.
Agreed.
I guess along that same line, if we embed more of those, let's say we have a robust form-based code that embeds those criteria and stronger design and blah blah blah. At what level of comfort would you all be with certain things being administratively reviewed? And it eventually goes all the way up to what does council think? But
I think we're used to it.
okay,
A lot of that is seen and goes through a number of conversations with Justin before it even comes here.
okay.
Lately, it's been a lot of sensitive use and I don't want to say transformational projects, but the larger projects that require more notice, even if not special land use, we're noticing more projects that are changing characteristics.
Does your site plan review section address that enough, or do we need to propose some tweaks to?
I think there's some tweaks.
Okay. All right. So jumping back, let's talk about height. So I will be the first to say I was very confused by the minutes from the September meeting, and in talking through it with Justin and Aaron, and Michelle texted her in Spain and sent her an email, and she couldn't respond very well because the keyboard was different, but she's still very much interested in what's happening. So I took her up on that and said, what is going on? So I think, so here are a couple sections that we had Smith Group JJR do for us today to try to nail down some level of consensus. So what I gleaned was that there are concerns for how things transition into the neighborhoods. There's concern for how things look and feel along the street, whether that's Woodward or 9 Mile primarily. It all applies to everywhere, but I think those are kind of the most intense places. So should there be this idea of a setback on upper stories? How tall is too tall? How tall I think that physically Woodward is wide enough for you to have really tall buildings, but is that what you really want? I think some of the depth of those parcels limit their ability to be super tall, and driving it today and zooming along on Street View as well, there's my personal opinion, and there was Michelle's personal opinion before that of how tall is too tall. I think if you want to go that tall, you can. I think it becomes a parking issue. I think it might just be too intense. So
There's a significant issue around community tolerance.
yeah. So we kind of tweaked it from the last draft, but I think we might want to bring it down a little bit. And so that's kind of my approach in leading this part of the conversation, but feel free to jump in. So right now, as is written, both districts, The cap is at 65 feet. We bumped it up. I know it's 70 right now. It had been 55 in the draft. It's hard to do 5 stories with 55 feet. So we bumped it up to 65. Minimum building height of 25 feet and 2 stories. I think that we probably all are in agreement on the minimum building height. It's the maximum that we need to talk about. And is 5 stories even too much? Should the maximum be lower? And then this idea of bonus stories comes on top of that. So that was one way I was leaning, is maybe you have a maximum height of something else. There's so much that gets involved in this in terms of the cost to builders and developers to switch the type of construction they do. It can be an arbitrary number that we put out there. It can be tied to architecture and how they're engineering these steel versus whatever. I think the useful area around that 9 mile Woodward node lends itself to the tallest, and then it's just a matter of how you want to how tall that is, and then how you want to step down from there. So these couple sections kind of show what the code says right now, with the understanding that it might be too intense, and there might be differing opinions from everyone. So again, it's me coming at it from a fresh perspective, trying to interpret everything that's been talked about to date. So how tall is too tall? Is 10 stories too tall?
Yes.
Yes.
Is,
Sorry, did anyone disagree with that? I don't want to make the loudest voice.
Yeah, I
in the
don't care
only
about
person.
re-election. I'll say it's fine. I'm kidding.
I think 100 feet we think could be what, like 8 stories? I think that's what we capped it at in the district. Is 8 stories too tall along West 9 Mile?
Yes.
Yeah.
On West 9 Mile, yeah.
Okay. Is 5 stories too tall along West 9 Mile? If it's stepped back, as it would not be at this level. We could do like at the 3rd story, the bottom diagram here. So like that, we're showing that like front yard step back for upper levels. So right now it's broken at 5, but we could do a 3 story, then you get pushed back, and then have a couple bonus stories above that. So with the tallest it would feel along the street would be 3 stories or something. What level of comfort is there with, instead of what we're showing on the Woodward section here is a 5.8, it would be a 3.5 on 9 Mile.
I think the reason that the tallest building on the west side of 9 Mile doesn't feel that tall, which is the existing housing commission building, is because of the way that it is, to some extent, set back and framed by giant mature trees, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we've now, by altering our ordinance to pull everything forward, we are in some ways taking out the ability to create some of that natural screening. I don't know that I disagree with our 0 lot line setback, but
Yeah.
In a tall building, is there any reason, knowing that parking is not what you're putting in front, but is there any reason to allow them to be slightly set back for some other type of amenity that makes it feel less on top of you?
Absolutely, we can write it that way if others agree.
We really haven't talked about that.
We
before.
often call it like a dooryard, so we can allow like a 10-foot
We did a little bit across the street with the dog park.
additional pseudo-public space.
That becomes more palatable to me, especially if you go to the 3/5 with certain conditions, or I'm not sure what the right number is, but that concept of the trade-off becomes much more palatable to me.
If we go with 5 stories, I would really urge that step back, because 5 stories just on its face seems really tall.
Yeah, it's 0 lot line.
Yeah.
That's what we're showing in the top section here.
Yeah, I love the project for Ferndale House, but as soon as those elevator shafts went up and I drove by, I was like, ooh, it looks taller than the concept in my head, but you get used to it.
Yeah, it'll be fine.
It'll be fine, yeah, it'll
But
be great.
the big difference between it and what's behind it
Right.
isn't the height. They're going to be the same height.
Yeah.
It's the
How it feels.
the ability to surround and sort of shield and make a natural space when you
Correct.
don't have a 0 lot line.
So would we make that dooryard setback required if they went a certain height?
I think that's fair.
Yeah.
So the like urbanist purist in me, which
I like the idea, but I don't know.
Like-
This is something weird going to happen.
so like are we gonna get a lot of weird like that urban street wall, is that going to be interrupted too much by all of these buildings being like set back? I don't know.
I'd love to make courtyard in Chicago in my 4th floor walk up, right? Like,
Right? So like we could make it like it has to be a courtyard. Like it
Oh,
can't
no.
just be just like this weird like 10-foot wiggly line going down the street, but we could make it an intentional.
And we have rules about the contiguous nature of green space in our PUD requirements, for example. That, you can't have like a tiny strip all the way around and say it's green space.
I like the idea of a courtyard though, because a courtyard you could have some kind of a, partial wall or a fence that could serve as that continuous building kind of feel along the lot line, even though there might be a courtyard within that.
Not being an architect or a landscape designer or anything, my background doesn't lend me to like creative thinking about these things. There are people who are much more creative about how to meet a requirement. I think if we try to state our, like the intent is to be able to soften the impact of the building from the street, one way to accomplish it may be to provide some sort of green space. I'd just be interested to see how people do it.
And that's why I like it tied to the height of the building.
Sure,
So it's like,
sure,
if you
yeah.
want to go this high, you have to provide this.
Some interpretation, but I don't know. Are we now totally screwing up our frontages?
You lose me when we talk about creating that courtyard because you inherently create this toothy street facade frontage. But I mean, I understand that it's valuable to have the green space as well. So.
It's just been very interesting to see that side-by-side difference that we're going to have on 9 Mile and on Withington. That I think it's a really instructive corner, because there's also going to be a park on Plan Avon. There's just interesting ways that those edges are going to be addressed. Maybe there's one we like better than another. I think about the projects that we saw on the east side recently, the one and how different the one on the service drive was from the one on Bermuda, and how different they were in their treatment of the open space surrounding the buildings. And one was this just like sort of simple, pave it all, put in a parking, and the other created a gorgeous public space. Perceived to be public space. It's for the residents, right? But
That was another one of my questions.
but I never could have told anyone to do that.
Yeah. So we haven't really started on a landscaping section. Michelle had some stuff in there on street trees. I think it needs to be more robust than that. So when it comes to that kind of treatment of that space, whether it's a dooryard, whether it's the streetscape itself, whether are you ever going to want to require builders that are coming in and doing a whole block redevelopment to help do some of that streetscape improvements at the same time, or is that always going to fall on the DDA? And are we walking a fine line of standards for streetscape and how they're implemented? I mean, we can put private open space standards in there that would address things like a courtyard or deliberate green space, and I guess it's how far do you want to push things? Because right now your landscaping requires like a green belt or something, and that's, to me, that's a very suburban terminology for, it's not really an urban typology.
I guess I would like to see some examples
Okay.
before I mean, I'm not a landscape architect, so I don't have that background. but
I don't either.
I would like to see examples, I guess, of what that looks
Sounds
like.
good.
What's more urban than
And I want to get the feel, but not stifle creativity.
right.
Right.
Yes. I think there's a, requiring some level of design, but not prescribing it.
Well, and it could be that in the interest of sustainable landscape, we could
Exactly.
look at recommendations for certain species and that kind of thing. But I don't know as far as the design of that.
So height, I think I'm hearing less intensity along 9 Mile. Along Woodward,
Less intensity than Woodward along 9 Mile.
Yeah.
Yes.
yes. So for those corners where there might be some potential for higher, like if Rust Belt were to go, they would build on top of that and make that go really tall.
Right.
So that, it's that corner, that would wrap the corner there. What we could do is, right now we have it as in the incentive table, which I didn't really edit very much, just tweaked a couple things based on your last conversation, because I was just getting myself all wrapped up and confused in all of this. We could designate on the map itself that these areas with like a line that say these areas can be the maximum height, whatever we all decide that's going to be. And then the rest of that, downtown core, dark blue color, could be one level, and then the lighter blue another level. And if we add another level of transition, we can just step everything down. I know Michelle had the height dependent on the building type, and I don't think that works. I think you want to have whatever the building, how it's being used, whatever it looks like, to have the height be consistent as that threshold drops down. So one thought I had was, and I forwarded a drawing to Justin when we were first talking about this, and I didn't include it because it's just confusing. But the idea that within that intersection that you could have that maximum height out like a block in either direction, a certain number of feet. So right now in the building height incentives table, it's within 300 feet of that intersection. I think that's it works, but I feel like it needs to be shown on a map what we're talking about, because otherwise people have to get out their ruler and measure it. Does that generally, am I feeling you on the most intense right at that intersection?
Yeah.
Yes.
And I like the idea of delineating it on a map as well.
Okay. So here, this section down below is too intense, right? Is that what I'm hearing? That 100 feet probably is too much.
Yeah.
Okay. So at that intersection of 9 and Woodward, where we want the tallest, what makes sense is a cap. Is tall enough.
What's there?
5 stories?
Yeah, what is there currently?
That's a good question. Not that tall.
No.
2?
It's even
Maybe 3.
70?
What's permitted there is 70 right now.
But what's
Maybe
Center?
3.
Or,
Ferndale Center.
Ferndale Center.
It's the only thing that's.
6 stories?
No, it's like
70 feet.
I think somebody said it was 55 feet.
55?
I've heard that number tossed around before.
Based on probably that building. Okay.
It's only 3 stories with their high floor levels.
So we'd be dramatically intensifying uses at multiple corners, and then that gets us back to conversations about parking, but also
That provision's only 2.
just impact on public infrastructure. You know, I think about we've got a couple of corners right now where, because we're an old city with wonky platting, you've got some sidewalks that get really narrow.
Yeah.
There's not much you can do about it. So there's if we were going to dramatically increase intensity at any of these corners, I would also want us to think about walkability improvements and pedestrian refuges and how you continue to make it safe to interact with those corners. because now you're going to have buildings right up to the edge, and cars aren't going to be able to see you.
Yep. So if it's 70 is the max right now, I don't know, do we feel comfortable about taking away any of that development potential in other areas? So I think, is it 70 right now along 9 Mile too, I think?
Up to plan limit.
Okay. So part of it is, and then, so in terms of doing like a 3-5, max plus maybe those setbacks happen at that above the third story. Maybe you get those bonus floors after that third level. We would sort of be not down zoning. We would just because right now 70 is allowed, but it would be contingent upon you providing some public benefit. And
But I like that.
I think that's good because you're not just giving away the baby with the bathwater. Like,
Right.
you're saying if you're going to build this tall, we want something in trading for it. So,
Well, not just because you're building that tall, but because you're intensifying the demand on everything around you.
so what if in the urban, what are we calling it? Downtown core, it's a 3-5, both in terms of step back, in terms of the bonus height. You can get up to 2 floors of bonus height if you do X, Y, and Z. And then in the urban flex areas, maybe just max of 3.
I like
Can
that.
Can our utilities handle this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We did a lot of
Alright.
that.
Just checking.
Yeah, throughout the
We could
dot
put a
process.
requirement in to bury them all.
Yeah, the more that happens, the more new development, the more the lines get buried, which one benefit. And just adding Brent's notes to the conversation, which I think if he was here, he would probably change it too. But at least his initial thoughts were for downtown core, 55 feet would be the max, and then with incentives either 65 or 75. And then urban flex. 45 feet for the base, and then with incentives, 55 or 65, just to add that to the conversation.
I think that fits in line with what we're talking about, though. I mean, in spirit, anyway.
Yeah. Well, and I just use stories as shorthand, so we'll put them in there, but I think you need to have both. We've gone back and forth on several recent codes that not having too squat of stories, not having too tall of stories, but requiring that first floor be tall. So I think by putting both the height in feet and the number of stories will get you consistency. Okay.
I just don't know that 3 stories in the urban flex
Is enough.
maximum is enough, especially considering the 2 projects we keep referencing
Right.
on either end of 9 Mile, which we are both seated. Yeah, both 5 stories seated firmly in the urban flex space. Now, in the future, we're saying these buildings are not going to fit in the urban fabric. They're going to be sticking out 2 stories above everything else.
Or-
I don't want to say a sore thumb, but they'll be more.
Yeah.
Or are we just
More
saying we
prompt.
want them stepped back?
So, and to me, I mean, what Commissioner, what Brett was saying was that is more in line with those buildings fitting in the context. So.
Yeah, I mean, even the dot, is in the urban flex area now. That's going to be, 68.5 feet height, so that would be a little bit higher than 65.
Is that too tall? Or do we need to, I mean, we're talking about adding a 3rd district or sensitivity zone or whatever anyway, which might change things, but based on these 2 classifications, are we limiting future development that's already happening?
Yeah, so getting back to that, if we build the dot, don't do the upper 2 stories, and then change the height requirement, and then all of a sudden you can't build that additional.
Yeah, the offices or
Yeah.
apartments or whatever on top.
But you're right, like that was the conversation of,
And that's
what
another
if
good
you-
project to bring up.
Yeah, what if you've got 5 or 7 stories right now, and then you've got 3 right next to that, and then it really is going to start to look odd.
So what if the height is the same across these 2 districts, but then we add, so we we already have this idea of like stoop frontages being allowed in the urban flex, but requiring a more residential stoop type frontage at the areas closest to residential areas. So,
Because I think that's the thing that keeps coming up time and time
Yeah.
again, is that you've got the potential for a
Big mixed
70-foot
use.
tall building that steps down to 50, and then you've got your one-story house behind it, and depending on how the shadow falls, you feel like you've lost all your sunlight, you've lost all, and so how do we transition, from a 70 or 50-foot tall building to somebody's backyard, where the shadow doesn't fall on it 50% of the year, then it's no big deal. But when it's constantly going to be in shadow, like on 9 Mile, the east side of 9 Mile development, it really stresses people out.
yeah. So this is one of the things that, if I could, like, I have my little picture where I was trying to draw Michelle's version of this, and I could not draw a buildable building that made any sense with the like angle and stuff. So we simplified it a little by just requiring a 20-foot rear yard setback. We can still require some level of stepping back, but the challenge is this little diagram that was in the presentation in September on the top there with the little purple triangles being cut off by that angle, that's a weird shaped building.
Yeah.
So like, we're trying to both step things back at the front and step things back at the back to the point where you have like maybe 20 feet of buildable space in those upper 2 stories. That is a challenge architecturally to both build and program, but also it'll look weird. So one remedy to that was having a stronger 20-foot rear yard setback. You'd still have developable property. Next to the alley, that basically becomes a 40-foot area, right? So there are only a couple instances where next to adjacent to a residential, there's not an alley. We can figure out how to create exceptions to those rules. But if we're talking about capping all of the development, let's say at 65 or 70 total, but the go-to of 3 stories at 45 or 50, I mean, that's a 1-to-1 angle if you're thinking about shadows and stuff. This is typically what we've done in other places to help mitigate that transition. So this is just a quick little section. It's basically 9 Mile on the left. On the right was me having fun with the Woodward stuff, but forget that that's there. So a house, a garage abutting the alley, an alley, 20 feet setback, and then the building. So if we're talking about setting things back in the front and the back, we just have to be on those upper levels, step backs. We just have to be careful that we're not making it too weird looking, I guess. Looking like a cake topper. Like you have like one weird little penthouse floor that, for all the benefit of not casting 10 extra feet of shadow onto the neighbors, will make your downtown look weird.
Yeah.
So this was Michaela and my approach at trying to simplify things, but still get the same result. There may still be a need for another step back in the rear and the front, but again, once you have them coming from both angles, that's why we thought it made sense to not necessarily require it up to 5 stories in the front, because you might want to require it more in the back.
And side note, I guess, if this was a public hearing, you'd have all the reaction to the right half of it, because everyone would say, my God, 100 feet next to that house, and no one would notice that the spot across the street is 65 feet. If you had it reversed, if the right side only went to 40 feet, whatever, everyone would freak out about the 65 feet next to the house. So we've had this like time and time again of that same question of how do you resolve that, not have it so weird that you can't build it, and yet still, how do you still respect the homeowner? I don't have an answer. That's my
That they're going to react negatively,
they'll
no
see
matter
that
what.
and, like,
Not always. We've had some very thoughtful people on parking committees and other things. So I don't want to cast all of our
No,
all our homeowners, but yes.
No, yeah, and that's, we
Oh, no,
have
you didn't say it.
very,
I think-
No, I just,
very dedicated,
they have a
City.
very legitimate concern, and
People know that things change. They
Yes.
just want to
yeah. So I think
try to find the best outcome.
what this 20-foot setback does is when I was talking about that like 45-degree angle, right? So if this is a 65, because my cursor is showing, if this is 65, right? 65 feet out here lands you about right here. So if this was a situation with the sun, right now this is south of this in my section. If it was reversed, if this was north, what would be shaded would be the garage area and a little bit of the backyard. But there's still, this particular house, it's a craftsman bungalow type thing that there's still like deck and backyard space in this. I think it's like 110, this is me on Google estimating how deep these lots are without actually looking up on the parcel file what it was. But, so that 20-foot setback really does the job of limiting the intensity. And if we're talking 65 as our max, we could require, if we wanted to add another little step back up here, we could, but it wouldn't dramatically change the impact on the adjacent residential from a height and lighting perspective. I think we have strong enough architectural design guidelines that making it soft in appearance and having windows and you can require them to build a little screen wall type thing in the alley to hide, garbage cans or whatever. That was our reasoning with trying to simplify that
I have
a
a dumb
bit.
question. I'm on slide 8, and I'm now confusing myself with maximum heights in my ordinances in the car, conveniently. Right now, our maximum is 70. Yes? No. Wondering where 65 came from, and if it's even useful to. What's our?
we had a higher ground floor and then, like a floor to floor for the upper ones that was lower, something
Yeah.
like that, like maybe a 12 or 16 first floor and then
Yeah,
10 upper.
yeah.
What's our current CBD max?
So it depends on the street. But
Right.
Woodward between Whittington, Bedford, Troy, 70.
70.
Um,
Okay.
9 Mile between Glenmont and Woodward, 70. And then as you go west, is when it goes down to 50. West Troy between Woodward and Allen, 70.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to back up for a second. What's the use of 65 versus 70?
So it was written at 55, and that didn't make sense to us, so we bumped it up to 65. It could be 70. Doesn't matter.
I think she was saying it was hard to build a 5-story building.
That part I get, yes. But why would we go down 5 feet? I guess was kind of my. Yeah,
That's a good point.
We can round it back up to 70.
yeah. But it seems like that piece. I get the 55 to 65.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So let's assume it
I would
needs-
even question our minimum at 2, and should our minimum be at 3? But if we're
That's a
gonna
good
make
point.
60, if we're gonna be 65, we might as well just stay at 70. I guess. is
The
all
only
I'm saying.
reason, along,
Really, I mean, there's no perceptible
yeah,
difference other than us potentially monkeying with.
it's very hard for them to cost effectively
Too
build
much.
2-story buildings. But maybe in your urban flex, having a minimum of 2, where having just a 2-story townhouse type building might make more sense.
I see.
So maybe not in your core, but in that other step down
I
district.
see. Sorry to go back. Just started to confuse myself with 65. Why am I 65?
I have wrapped my head into like this web of weirdness when it comes to building heights so I
Oh,
hear you.
don't-
It's so
yeah,
confusing here and writing 5 other codes simultaneously. Like,
Certainly understand.
it can be whatever we want it to be. I guess I have generally what I need to try and write.
Give it another go.
Yeah. Does this 20, I just want some buy-in on the 20 rear yard setback.
I kind of like the idea of playing with that versus putting additional restrictions on the building. So I'd be supportive of that.
I agree. It sort of takes out the hardship on the architect developer to try and do some weird, funky facade.
Shape. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then,
Other thoughts?
when it comes to this potential third district, or
Thoughts from Ferndale House? Sorry, I should probably ask you guys. About rear yard setbacks? I mean, people who actually build things in the room
Yeah,
like to ask.
that's true.
We used to have a developer on
use
the
them.
commission, and it was fantastic. He didn't build here, but he gave us like that gut check moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, will you come up to the mic? Sure. Yep.
I do think one thing to keep in mind is either the subterranean or the second floor parking will limit building space on the floors above. So it's just one thing to keep in mind.
Understood. Thank you.
can we point out some areas that you're particularly sensitive to, where you think there needs to be more care in transitioning down to the residential neighborhoods?
Do you want to go, Viviana?
I suppose I could. I don't know if it's just a matter of extending the urban flex from this area maybe further down Vester. It just seems like it's such an abrupt transition here, and also perhaps down this area as well. I think those are areas I'm most concerned about. And then I don't know what's going on here because those are city-owned lots, so whether that would be CBD or R3 or whatever in the future, I think we need to consider that area as well.
Yeah, so I wasn't sure. I just basically did it based on what was already CBD. Definitely, I wasn't sure if I could touch the parking district. It sounds like I can, so we'll loop those in.
I think you've got to, and we already know this is a weird corner and we're already building something here, but spaces like this can be
Those are the areas I'm
and
questioning.
then I always think about, just because, I mean, so we've got parking on this street, we've got parking on this street, we've got narrow turns. I always think about if I'm now lining these that really don't have any curb cuts right now. I just think we would need to be thoughtful if we were putting residential or anything else along streets that currently don't have a significant amount of curb cut traffic. That's something we often, in terms of us overthinking things, maybe. How additional intensity onto side streets impacts pedestrian safety, turning radiuses at corners, stacking at stop signs. We spent a lot of time looking at stacking when we talked about parking structure, stacking on the two side streets to the south, the one immediately neighboring it. Those are things I think about in terms of major circulation changes. I mean, there are things we've talked about with Ferndale House too.
If we can talk about the DOT, is that what we're calling it? We can call it DOT, not DOT, whatever. So if that were going in under the proposed changes that we've talked about today to this draft ordinance, we'd require them to be 20 feet back, the building to be 20 feet back from the alley. Is that enough there in terms of that shift then across the alley to those residential homes?
We're not modifying what we've already approved on the
No,
DOT, though, right?
I'm
Okay.
speaking theoretically.
Okay.
It might make that project less viable
Yeah.
if you lost 20 feet.
You're talking strictly based on the height from what we've seen, or that particular
So-
project?
If this code had been in place for when that project was happening and getting approved, right now I'm proposing this 20-foot rear yard setback adjacent to residential. So right there, you would have lost that strip. As that being identified as one of those hard corners, one of those hard transition areas,
Yeah.
and it fresh on all of your mind, what else would have made that more palatable or whether it's height, whether it could be anything.
I don't know if I have a good answer to that, but I think we've already seen this trade-off happen at Wolf River, where we pulled something forward, maybe bend it a little more than we typically would in ground floor activation, because they did a different type of activation in front with some green space, in response to neighbor concerns about it encroaching. I guess, yeah, we've already seen the trade-off happen. We got less retail because they needed to pull
Yeah.
forward. So with the dot,
Yeah.
Because, I mean, we do have a setback that's upper level at the rear, but not.
that would be for the office, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think with the dot, with something that's primarily meant to alleviate a parking problem,
Yeah.
you probably have a less viable project. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if I have anything constructive to add.
So I guess in that case, they would, let's just pretend again that this had all, just as a case study, I guess. If it hadn't, they would come and say, we would like to get a variance, and then,
Right.
for that 20-foot setback. And it's basically, I mean, it was already a challenge with the neighbors, and rightly so. Like, that's a pretty big difference for them, but it would have been harder to probably grant it rather than vice versa, of allowing it and then asking them to push it back. But if we're thinking going forward, that there would be less of a need for something of that scale to alleviate parking, that maybe it's moot. But
And could we not see this as a learning experience as
Sure.
well, and therefore modify our code based on that learning experience? Again, I think the timing of this matters.
So we do have one more thing on our agenda tonight.
yes,
I'm just looking at time. It's 8:30. Have we gotten through the main points that you wanted to get through, Kathleen?
yeah,
Okay.
yep. I'm feeling good. So thank you for your patience with me learning.
Oh, this has been really productive. Thank you.
Good.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Really appreciate you digging into this with us. What are the next steps on this, Justin? I know in your memo it was sort of like, well, it could kind of come back to Planning Commission before it goes any further, or we've talked tonight about the DDA needs to be
Yeah.
brought in terms of design.
The DDA needs to look at it again through staff level and then the design committee. I think doing that, I think Barry's out for the entire month of December, which is great for him. But so I think we need to get that
Is he all right?
in front of him. Yes, I think he's earned a lot of vacation time. I'm not sure. You don't need to put that on the record. But I think that he, I want to get this in front of him before, before December, to have his review. And I don't know when the design committee meets again, so I'll get with him on that.
But we would see a final draft before it was noticed for public hearing?
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah, I don't think we're ready for public hearing next month.
Nor do I. Yeah, okay,
So,
great.
which is perfectly fine. This is something I think timing's appropriate. There's a lot going on, and so
I just don't want us continuing to sort through something at a public hearing, that's all.
no, yeah, I agree. So, and it can be this can be the only item on the agenda for a meeting, a special meeting, something workshop, whatever. So,
Yeah, I guess I just want to make sure that we were comfortable in the sort of the overall themes and direction.
yeah, I think we got a lot of great feedback, so we appreciate it.
Yeah, before engaging
Yep.
further.
So, and I sent you all the presentation. So if there's more things you see, over the next couple of weeks, just definitely send it to myself and Kathleen, and we'll go from there. So
Thank you.
the other two future ordinance amendments, I think, are a little more straightforward potentially. And I think Ian can attest we've had a lot of conversations at the BZA over the years just about these two items. One of them we kind of talked about earlier this year with the master plan updates. So R2, it potentially updating the lot width. R3 was recently updated to 33 feet. I put in here 35 feet as a placeholder for R2. Wasn't sure Planning Commission's feelings on 35 versus 33. Not a big difference there. But there's been a few variance requests over the years that have ranged from 33 feet to 40 feet. So this would just eliminate those, I think, requests, and also just align with the master plan's goals for R2, having some sort of density, not quite to R3's level. I would also amend propose an amendment for making the lot size 4,000 square feet to match what R3 and R1 would have. So that would align there. I didn't include that in the memo, but so that's the first one. The other one, we've been talking about a lot about accessory buildings over the years, garages, primarily tool sheds, and so between those requests and the new building official kind of brought to my attention and the fire marshal, the building code does offer some protection and suggestions about a 3-foot setback if fire rated construction is present. And so we'd propose bringing that forth too. So that, I don't know, Ian, if you have anything to add just on what you've seen at the BZA, but those kind of aligned with just what I've seen over the past few years there.
If we had the 3-foot setback for the accessory structures instead of the 5-foot, we would see, it would be a noticeable cutback in the number of people coming looking for variances from us, certainly. Yeah. I think from BZA's perspective, we think it makes sense for the most part. For the other proposal, for the lot size, the areas, considering that we're looking at a lot of properties that are going to be essentially the same depth along a block here. Would it make sense to look at reducing the square footage lower than 4,000 for some of those parcels that have less than 40 feet width?
Yeah, potentially. I think so. Yeah, that makes sense.
I think if you leave it at 4,000 square feet for these, even though you're saying you can have a 35-foot frontage, you're really making it difficult for people to do that because if they're on a 100-foot lot, they're just not going to have that 4,000 square feet.
That's a huge house.
I mean, for Ferndale, that's a pretty big house.
So is
Well,
that,
that's the whole lot.
that's a lot.
It's not just
That's
the
a
house.
lot, yeah.
Yeah.
So, Ian, is that for was that for R2 and R3?
Yeah, I would say for both. I mean, the idea here is
6,000 in R2, which now makes even less sense.
right. Yeah, I had noticed that too, and
Yeah.
I think it's a good eye, Justin, for picking that out ahead of time. But getting up closer to 9 and Woodward, as you know, I live over in East Saratoga here, and we've got a lot of lots that are less than 40 feet wide. And then we're all the same depth for the most part, at least. Half of my block is, and as you go back, you find that in all the blocks. So
That makes sense to me.
So we don't have a maximum lot size, we just have a maximum density. Makes
Correct.
sense. So if someone wanted to acquire a few houses and put in something a little more dense that complies, with what's allowed in R2, we'd just go by our maximum density.
yeah, I think if they're going to meet the setback requirements and they're going to meet the lot frontage, odds are they're still not going to be falling too far below maybe 3,500. You get too much smaller than that for the lot size, they're not going to hit the setbacks.
I was thinking bigger, as opposed to the minimum. I was thinking about maxes.
Maxes.
In terms of what's permitted and what's a special land use in R2, and do we want it to be a little bit denser? You've got duplexes or
R2
even,
can go
like,
up to a
small
4, I
courtyard.
think. And beyond, is that right, Justin? R2 can go up to 4 units?
It's based on acre.
I've got 15 units per
So,
acre.
yeah, 15 units per acre. In the master plan, we talked about changing that to 20, and then I think after the Taft proposal, we backed
That's
off from
right.
that.
A bit lower,
That's right.
Yeah.
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 So if someone bought a couple of lots on East Saratoga and wanted to put in a little courtyard apartment, we regulate it based on the density.
Yep.
Not that's not necessarily permitted, so it's not a great example, but I wanted to ask about assisted living. I think it's in the master plan.
It is.
Is that something that we want to make a special land use in R2? In terms of allowing for more aging in place
Yes.
options closer to the downtown?
Yeah.
Why
Okay.
not?
I think so. That's a good idea.
It's in the master plan.
Yep.
Makes sense. I guess this was not on the memo, but related to sort of the 3-foot setback and fire-rated construction. We have had a few requests to the BZA lately that a lot of people have existing homes, families are growing. A lot of times their existing house is closer than 5 feet, and they have to start their new construction 5 feet above. So if you're adding a second story, it has to start at that 5 feet. Which has been a little problematic, I guess, from some of the applicants as far as routing utilities and things like that. There is a carve-out in the building code that does allow for, similar to the accessory structure idea, at 3 feet. You can go to 3 feet with fire-rated construction. We've been talking about that a little bit internally with the building official. I don't know if that's something of interest as well, but it's just something that is allowed for in the building code that our zoning ordinance doesn't allow for. And I can bring more details about that at the next meeting, but it was just something that kind of came up this week.
I think it makes sense to consider that because, one of the things we're trying to encourage people to do here is take their existing properties and improve existing properties. And if we make it difficult for them to do that because we're requiring weird,
Right.
your setback up top has to be different from your setback on your ground floor.
Right.
People are going to be more likely to move or else just raise the existing buildings and want to build new ones that may not fit as well into
Right.
the existing community fabric.
Right.
I agree too.
Go ahead.
So that's in addition to an existing structure, not like a new structure?
Right. Correct. It would have to be an addition.
My only comment on that was that I think the wording of the change needs to be clarified somewhat. I would just change Michigan Building Code to say current Michigan Residential Code. That's what you're referencing. That's
Yeah.
what your excerpt is actually from.
Right.
So, and just current, so that it's not. We don't continue to reference 2015 and
Right.
20 years in the future.
Where was that, Michael?
It is on. You know what? I'm using a really weird program right now. I can't tell you which page this is on.
Page 7?
Page 6.
6.
Yep.
It's right here. Where
Got
it
it.
says
Michigan
Michigan
Building
Building
Code.
Code and Michigan Building Code.
Thank
I would
you.
just change both those to current Michigan Residential Code.
I'm just trying to circle all the things we would want in. Do you need a motion on this? Or you're going to bring
No,
it back to
just
us?
discussion. I'll bring it
okay,
back.
Never mind.
Yeah.
Excellent. I'm trying to think. What other things are changing? Okay.
Great.
Trying to write a motion.
Yeah.
Sorry. Don't worry about me. I need more caffeine, Dan.
You want it?
No.
I'm on it.
Great. That's all helpful.
One of the things that I remember might have been Sarah and Krista being sort of proud of right when I joined the commission was there had just been a significant zoning update or we were just finishing it up and there was a reduction in a number of the sort of repetitive nuisance appeals that were going to the BZA as a result, and it had to do with lot coverage. Like a small change made a huge difference, and so I think some of these things really do make a giant difference in like the livability of your community and your house.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think that's the theme of tonight, actually, because if we're talking our form-based code in this body and the kind of minutia that we get into.
Great.
All right. Before we adjourn, Justin, I just wondered if could we just go over one more time upcoming meeting dates and training dates?
Yes.
Because I think I didn't respond to a text message you
Oh,
sent me, and now I want
no
to make
problem.
sure that we've got everything on our calendars
No
correctly.
So next on the agenda is our MAP Planning and Zoning Workshop. That would be Saturday, December 9th from 9:30 to 3:30. We'll be providing breakfast and lunch. So yes. And so Kathleen,
Oh, fun.
yes, will be leading the.
I may have to leave a
Workshop.
little early. It's the same day as our annual Detroit Historical Society ball.
Understandable.
They come with my hair done.
So
It takes 5 minutes. Come on.
Oh,
So-
that's black tie. That's hardcore.
Yeah. Unless you got to schlep stuff like me. So December 9, thank you, is
Yep.
MAP.
and
And is it December 15 meeting? Sorry.
December 13th
December
appeared to be the consensus to consolidate.
December 13 equals one meeting in December.
One meeting in December, unless everybody wants to talk about downtown form-based code.
On Christmas? Woo!
So,
Great. Thank you. That's really helpful.
does appear we'll have some agenda items. Again, last year I think we had 2 agenda items that were fairly sizable, I think. But I'll let you know kind of what the agenda is looking like, because people say a lot. They want to wrap things up by the end of the year, and then we'll see if they actually get things submitted. So.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Any other questions from the table or anything else you have for us, Justin, before we adjourn?
Brent, Commissioner Gearing, the reason he wasn't here is because they have a new baby. So very exciting. So I will request some pictures to share with the group. But I believe his baby's first name is Wendell. So
Wendell?
yes.
Sweet.
So cool name. So I'm sure Brent will be excited next time he is able to join. But
How exciting.
yeah,
Well, our congratulations.
yes. So,
Welcome, Wendell. Yay.
but that's all I had.
All right. With that, we will adjourn the meeting at, I don't know what time it is, 8:46.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Nice job.
Ooh.